Welcome to the EXCELcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Kuskiski, and today we have some very special guests here on this episode. The Apple Hill String Quartet and the director of the Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music, visiting all the way from New Hampshire. Thank you all so much for being here and talking with us today about your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Okay, let's just dive in. Talk a little bit to us about what the Apple Hill String Quartet does. Some of that may be obvious, you're a string quartet, but you're also in residence. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that means and the sort of symbiosis between the Chamber Music Center and the quartet's work.
So we're the quartet in residence at the Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music, and that means that we meet every day and rehearse for about 4.5 hours. We play concerts around the region and abroad and travel and do residencies at universities. We also have a very active local presence in the community, so we're performing in schools and have a regional concert series in New Hampshire.
And then for about 9 months of the year, as Colleen said, we're traveling. We have a program that tries to make connections in populations across the world, and then for 3 months of the year, everybody comes to us in the summer, and we have 5 intense 2-week chamber music workshops where everybody comes to us after we leave our tiny little pocket of nowhere and go out and meet people.
So being in residence really means being in residence in a deep way. And I want to get a little bit more into the programming in a moment, talking about the summer workshops and some of the other work that you do. Can you talk a little bit about what's special about being in residence in Apple Hill? I understand you have a kind of an expansive space, 100 acres or so. What is it like as a quartet to be there in this way, to be making music and learning music and preparing throughout the year? And what is it like from the director's point of view to be hosting a quartet in that capacity?
Well, we have a special space in New Hampshire. We're on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere up in the mountains. We have a quiet space to rehearse in. There's a lot of space in general. We can go to various different buildings, but during the year, it is pretty much, we're in our one big auditorium that we have that's winterized during the year, and that's where the quartet does all of its work. We also do our administrative work. We have an office obviously there, and then we're during the year we're getting applications in for the summer, and we're also preparing those summer assignments for the participants that will come for the summer. But as the quartet goes, we're in a room for about 4.5 hours a day, Monday through Friday, knocking out programs.
But maintaining 40 buildings that everybody stays in during the
It's
summer.
actually 41 buildings.
Sorry.
From our point of view, Apple Hill has a staff of about 9 people, and we have a board of directors. And from that point of view, it's really, I feel, really crucially important for us to have a group in residence. I think a string quartet is a wonderful group to have in residence because there's a lot of music written for the string quartet. It's kind of portable, they can travel easily. We're an arts organization, and if we're going to have a philosophy about our repertoire, if we're going to have a program that's going out into the world, I feel like it's really crucial for us to have an organization that takes a stand very in a concert setting or whatever you want to call it for what Apple Hill believes in, and that's why the quartet exists. And basically they are paid by Apple Hill. They get a salary, and I said this before, I always want everybody to get more money, but they get a salary, they get their benefits, and they get pensions, and it's basically being paid to exist and represent Apple Hill everywhere they go, and they're the best representatives.
Well, this seems like a dream situation, right? Where you have this kind of amazing support and a symbiosis between the artistry that you are focused on in cultivating programming and rehearsing and all, and getting down in the weeds of what it means to be a professional string quartet, but also deeply connected to the mission of this art center. And one thing that the symbiosis I want to talk about for a moment in a practical sense, because we have the quartet here, but you're also all co-artistic directors along with you, Lenny, right? So there's 5 co-artistic directors, which is a somewhat unusual circumstance, right? To
Yeah.
have the sort of executive director role playing so in such an interconnected way. And the way you just described the sort of this sort of relationship, it seems like it just has to be that way, that it's crucial to have that kind of a connection. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit about what does that actually mean. Even if you have this sort of dream situation where you can just rehearse, it sounds like you're very much invested and involved in some of the administrative work of making that mission succeed and happen. Can you talk a little bit about the functional roles and how that works to have 5 artistic directors and putting together programs?
I think one thing that's unusual about me and my role is that I'm also a musician. So I'm the executive director, and yes, we're all the artistic directors. So I think because I'm a musician, I think it's really great for an organization an arts organization, or at least for Apple Hill, to have it almost be artist, coming from the artist, everything that happens. And yeah, the quartet, they can talk about each one of them, what their responsibilities are, but I think that's also crucial because they're not only sitting in a concert room playing concerts or just rehearsing, they're actually working and doing a lot of the it's kind of artistic administration work.
I think we have a lot of practical meetings and vision and brainstorming sessions. So actually we have a set one every week where we'll say, plan for the next year, what will our repertoire be for the next 3 years, then the nuts and bolts of what's happening next week. So I think we work really well together, both in the short and long term, to have a vision for Apple Hill, and especially our repertoire and where do we want to go, who do we want to collaborate with. We're constantly thinking about that.
Right, and then each one of us has a job within the organization, so that Mike helps to assist with summer coordinating. Elise organizes a lot of the international tours, and Rupert and I act as agents and looking for concerts and sending out that material.
But it is an odd organizational model, and I think there were questions for us as we evolved towards this of is having 5 people coordinate the artistic stuff, is that going to dilute something somehow, or there's the inevitable but not insurmountable tension between what the executive branch can fundraise for and execute and what the artistic branch wants to do. And I think that gets a lot of groups into trouble. So I think what we've found is that because Lenny comes from an artistic musical background, he has a real sympathetic ear to what the rest of the performing ensemble wants to do, and because I feel like since we feel that respect, we're very amenable to understanding what the organization can pull off at any certain time. And I think that we talk a lot about, we may get into it later, about our kind of institutional ethos, and I think the skills that you use in chamber music to collaborate and work back and forth, I think that 5-headed co-artistic direction takes a lot of its cues from playing chamber music. And I think even our board, as they have gotten to know us and kind of the way chamber music works, even they have that same kind of constant, flexible, team building feedback happening, which is great.
I actually think too, because we always have a strategic plan that we're writing and we're updating. It's always 3 years, and every year we kind of update it. But the center of that plan is the artistic side of the plan. So everything under that, the marketing, the development, the finances, the building, all is part of the artistic part of the plan. And when you think of the creative process for a minute, the creative process and anything artistically, it's almost magic. It's almost like a miracle when people just create something out of nothing, or when the quartet goes out and plays, and they're totally, completely fantastic and they're well rehearsed, but when they walk on stage, it's happening in the moment. Things are happening.
Special.
And it's like a miracle. So if we're starting our plan from an artistic point of view, and it's all about the creative process and what's going to happen creatively, it's amazing how the other stuff, the finances, it's a lot of work, but miracles happen there too with everything. So I think it's a great way to sort of have an organization be the center of.
Well, it seems like a very healthy kind of system, and you're kind of a role model in many ways. I think about our audience, students, young professionals who are imagining they want this kind of a life. They want to have the sort of flexibility to be really deeply immersed in their art form, but also have the sort of relationship with the right collaborators in order to make that actually viable. And it sounds like that's the core to that for you all anyways is mission-driven programming and starting with the artistic inspiration. I want to talk a little bit about how that manifests in some specific ways. And so I think the summer workshops would be an interesting one to talk about because you're sort of a mecca for people to come together from all around the world, different age groups, skill levels. It's an unusual kind of experience, and I'm imagining a very special one. Can you talk a little bit about how those workshops work? What is it like for, what does an ensemble look like that you might be coaching? What are the different backgrounds and what are the goals that you have for that experience?
Well, each participant gets placed in 2 chamber music groups for the course of a session, which is about 10 days. So they'll get that music ahead of time to prepare, and hopefully they do. And they'll come and we'll have 4 periods throughout a day. So they meet with their coaches, a different coach for each piece for about an hour and a half every day. And then those other 2 periods they'll be off, which is time to live together as a community, whether that's working in the common garden, helping to prepare, set up meals, or playing ping pong, or playing soccer, contra dancing, whatever activity we have on hand for the day. So it's really a mix, fusing of a musical life and a communal life.
And the make of that community is, I think, really singular and something that evolved over like 50 years, where we have, by design, students of all levels, from professional and pre-professional graduate students, performance majors, to younger people that are just starting to play chamber music, and adult amateurs that are on a whole wide range of experience. And then also people from all over the world that we've met on our travels, a lot of people in the local community. It's a really interesting mix of people.
I would say, like, those final concerts, except for maybe a family reunion, you would never have a concert where there's some people who go to Juilliard and some people it's their first time playing chamber music, and of all different ages, like 12 and 82. So
It's a fascinating thing to administrate both artistically and logistically.
many stories.
I think also because we do the groups by level, you can have, you were asking about the makeup of a group. So you could have a 68-year-old retiree who is a criminal defense attorney and won every case, but they decided to
Or a
start,
Nobel Peace Prize
or a
winner.
Nobel Peace
my
Prize.
goodness.
Yeah,
we
this
have
past summer.
Wow.
And they decided to take up the violin, and they've been playing for 2 years, and they're in a group with a 14-year-old young girl who's also been playing for about 2 or 3 years, but she's playing first violin. Let's say the Nobel Prize is playing second violin. You have an African American from one of our partner programs, and then who's maybe like 18 or something, and then the cellist could be somebody from rural New Hampshire that never saw an African American, that's never met a Nobel Peace Prize person, and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then our audience is kind of wowed by it, and we are too.
So what are the outcomes of this kind of inclusive experience, right? I can imagine, the power of that alchemy and what can come out of it. What do you hope comes out of those experiences for those who are involved?
What usually happens is that you find that participants start their own initiatives. They tend to go out into their own communities, and they like to come to Apple Hill because they feel, on top of having a tremendously great experience of working on chamber music and using that concept of working together within the chamber music ensemble, they like coming to Apple Hill to grab that experience, and then they go back out. Because in a way, they were seeking it because they wanted to be a part of something like that anyway.
Wow.
And they find we have a non-competitive atmosphere. So it just sort of permeates a certain amount of enthusiasm. So, some of the folks will go back to Cyprus and start their initiatives, or go to Israel or West Bank, Palestine, or
Newport, Rhode Island.
Newport, Rhode
Yeah.
Island,
Yeah.
Dallas, Providence, Rhode Island, Baltimore. They're just, it tends to grow and grow and grow, and I think that's one of the most rewarding things that can come on.
I think also there's a sense that, especially for people who are, studying in a music school and it's very competitive, that that the world is bigger than music, but at the same time, art is big enough to hold everyone and to really which I think is I think everyone experiences that in a slightly different way, but.
And it's such a powerful experience that really can start to get at some of those prejudices that might be deeply rooted there. You don't even know they're there, but then you have this experience you take away, it kind of erases that.
Right.
And I think something that everybody, I think much more so than when we were in school, I think there's an idea now that you can use all of your artistic life to try to improve the world.
Yeah.
And you know, just by playing music, you're improving the world. But I think along with creating a beautiful piece of music over those 10 days, the fact that you've made some close connections with people that you didn't think you were ever going to have a close connection with, I think that makes people really excited.
Well, and as you just pointed out, Rupert, this is not just a matter of an inclusive and diverse community based on age or background, but it's also global, right? You have people that have come from all around the world to work together. And some might wonder, well, how's that possible? How did your chamber, your summer workshops, develop that kind of an audience? Well, in fact, you have been going out into the world for many, many years to kind of cultivate experiences to bring people together through music making. I'd love to talk a little bit about that. It seems like that's integral in this work that you've done internationally, playing in the Playing for Peace program, for example, that has led to sort of this ongoing opportunity to bring people who are already coming to your summer workshops with a sort of open-mindedness towards their potential, right, to make the world better. Tell us a little bit about Playing for Peace. What is that program aim to accomplish, and what does it actually functionally do? You go somewhere, play a concert, come back, what else happens?
You know, Playing for Peace is all about accepting, being supportive, and being open to everything that happens with society, with your colleagues, with other people, and also with your own self. So it's a program that started in the 80s, and it started because the previous generation of musicians at Apple Hill, they were going to Israel, and they were doing a workshop. They were forming groups, and they decided, with the help of the State Department and ambassadors and all kinds of people, to put Israelis and Palestinians together in chamber groups. And, remember that chamber music is all about watching each other, listening to each other, being flexible, being sensitive, and then adapting. Those are the very same skills that people need to get along in the world. So it was a great model for teamwork and just for people to sort of get along. And over the years, that program has developed, and now it's pretty much about everybody. It's not just the countries in conflict. It's about the conflict and walls that you have in your own self. So Rupert was talking about the supportive atmosphere. It's non-competitive. I think when somebody comes to Apple Hill, they're encouraged to be themselves. They're encouraged to look and see who they are. They don't have to strategize and figure out, like, what's the culture of Apple Hill so I can fit in. We encourage people to do that, and people find themselves to be free, to find hope, and to really find, like, this is a space where, at least temporarily, they can really go deep. Yeah.
And we talk a lot about how wonderful chamber music is, but there's a lot of stress in working together in something that intense, and I think there's a lot of groups that start with a lot of success, and then quickly they can't survive the rigors of an artistic life together.
Yeah.
And I think something that we talk about a lot is practicing what we preach. Some of us have been playing together for over 20 years, and you have your ups and downs, and I think having the core values that we've worked hard to articulate, trying to be really expressive, but also, as Lenny was saying, adjusting, being flexible, listening to each other, trying to find those close connections. We've worked on that ourselves in order to survive and keep playing together. So it's a useful thing to have in your mind all the time artistically.
Absolutely.
I think that when people can see an organization that represents its mission and vision statement, it really brings something to the table that makes folks come back. So one of the most important things that I think we do is to make sure that our guest artist faculty is a diverse body of individuals, so that the participant body sees their teachers as being someone that's like who they are. And so it's not just one specific group of individuals relaying this information or talking or coaching. It's everyone from all the different areas that you represent, all the different cultures, races, etc. And we intentionally design that into our program. So I think that's one of our biggest quiet success moments for our organization, to be honest.
There's a lot of room for more of that in
Well, that's,
classical
I
music.
think we're,
Exactly.
well, and we're also always learning, so like what are our next steps? We think
Yeah.
we're at a good place, actually, we could be in a better place. What
Yeah.
does that look like?
Well, what I love about hearing you talk about your work is how clearly, how thoughtful, and how deep your sense of mission is, but also a sense of sort of how your artistry can inform larger sort of strategic thinking about your lives, the priorities that you're setting, how to compromise, how to rise each other, lift each other up, and collectively rise. I mean, these you're right. I think these are huge lessons to be learned throughout not just classical music but throughout society, and I think it's really powerful for young people to see you all as role models, but then also to see you curate a community of role models. I'm just really curious about the tours. We've heard a little bit about some of the international work. I think it would be just helpful to just get a broad scope of the places that you have traveled to perform, to cultivate sort of inclusivity in teaching around the world. So mentioned Cyprus, I think, other places.
Cyprus, Algiers, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon this past year, Peru, Azerbaijan, Georgia,
Caucasus,
the
yeah.
Caucasus,
Wow.
Russia, Burma, Myanmar,
Wow.
Vietnam, Malaysia,
Ireland, Republic of
Ireland,
Ireland, Great
China,
Britain.
hopefully.
Worcester, Massachusetts. Yeah, so,
Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ann Arbor,
yeah, and
Michigan.
actually our first time here,
Wow.
so we're excited. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, I think that just gives our audience a snapshot too of sort of the global view that's so clear, you know, in the way that you talk about inclusivity and talking about the potential for music making to change lives, regardless of, you know, where people are from and what they've experienced in their lives. The final thing I just want to ask real quick before we run out of time is, you know, when you think about coming to a place like the University of Michigan and, you know, you're working with the professionals of tomorrow, the young professionals today, what do you sort of think about in terms of when you're mentoring them, you're coaching them, you're, you know, working with them sort of in a hands-on way? How do these sort of ideals permeate in the way that you work with them? What are you looking for them to sort of take away from an experience working with all of you?
Well, I think that what's sort of embedded in our group is that the people that you meet when you're in school often recirculate in your life. So the three of us went to Oberlin together as undergraduates, and then kind of went our separate ways and did different things, and then some 20 years later came back and found that we had a similar goal of playing string quartets and working for Apple Hill. And then you guys.
Lisa and I met at Tanglewood, and,
I
and
think-
had no idea we would be playing in a string quartet together
Yeah.
professionally.
I think like yesterday when we were working with the chamber groups, I think we were mostly just focusing on the music. You know, it was like just dive right in, challenge, encourage, like learn, just get into the music. And then also just at the forum to be able to say, this is what we do, that's what we do in our rehearsal, but then using that, you know, you can have summer festival, you can do, but it's always starting with the actual art.
And I think what's great about the students here, and I think we've been really blown away, is that you know, the working with them artistically, and they're at such an incredible level, and there's so much chamber music here
It's great.
that people are working on with such integrity, which is fantastic. And then you know, at each step, just talking a little bit more about the mission and having that be received so positively, getting to delve into that a little more in the EXCEL discussion this morning. And then I think the other thing that we really noticed is there is a really fantastic level of diversity here, and I don't know if that's, I imagine that's intentional and the school's working on that, but for the five of us that go to a lot of different institutions, I think that's something that the university should be really proud of, because it's palpable to us.
Yeah.
Well, and just the EXCEL program, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That we didn't have when we were in school,
Yeah,
that I think
and
neither,
that's
yeah.
so needed.
is absolutely going to change society.
Yeah.
You know, when I think of teaching, though, I think what I think is really important in musicians, but anybody in the arts, is that it's really crucially important for them to express themselves and to express what a composer is trying to say. Because composers have phrases and they're structured really beautifully, so there's architecture there. There's somebody playing an instrument and it's really hard to play a string instrument, so they've learned a craft and they're learning it to express themselves. And so I think the role of an artist is so crucially important to get to the basics. It's not about fancy clothes and going into a big concert hall and having a lot of people. It's about expressing what's really crucially important, which are all the emotions that go into art, visually, audibly, just physically, everything. And I think that's one of the things that I think is really crucially important to teach to anybody, but in a setting like this, yeah.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's, I mean, I wasn't surprised to hear you describe this work and when you're talking about working with young professionals, because it's so clear that for you the medium is the message, right? And that making great music together can be a metaphor and actually an example of how an organization can flourish and how you can make the kind of impact that you want. And I love that that is so deeply rooted into all of the things that you do. And it's our pleasure to be able to host you. We're fortunate to have support for the resources like this EXCELcast, but it's only possible when we have role models like you all to be here. So I want to thank you all for spending some time talking to us today about your work, and we're looking forward to following it in the years to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.